Alex, it's so nice to meet you. I am so glad to have you on the Everything Saxophone podcast.
It's so nice to meet you. Thanks so much for having me on.
I've been listening to your brand new album, Dream Band. It is so good. It is so good. I'm going to definitely be diving into that. But the first thing is, I want people to get to know you. You're across the pond in London. So, you know what I'd really love to know, because the other thing I'm going to be harping on, and as I mentioned this before to you before we went on the air, your sound is incredible. It's so good. So I want to know how you got started in music. And I'm saying music, not just saxophone, because saxophone may not have been your first instrument, but how you got started in music. Then how did you get started on saxophone, and your early teachers, mentors that really inspired you?
Great question. A great multi-part question. I guess, yeah, I mean, my first instrument was violin, and I wasn't very good at it. Ultimately, I don't think I tried really hard, and I was really lucky with my school that I was able to have violin lessons there. But you kind of, you know, when you just don't feel that you have an aptitude for something necessarily, even though you enjoy the sound of other people playing it, and you don't feel that you have a natural sort of affinity for the instrument. So that was that. And I also used to sing as a treble, as like a boy treble when I was before my voice broke. I sang in some operas and stuff. So that was, yeah, I mean, that's one of the most fun musical things I've done to date, actually, including anything I've done on the sax. I love doing that, but when my voice broke, didn't end up being so great. But I think, yeah, I think possibly something to do with the singing high, the soaring over nice harmony kind of thing. The sense of, you know, floating about up there is maybe why I gravitate towards the upper register of the tenor quite a bit, and I enjoy playing alto for that reason as well. But yeah, so they were my first two, the violin and singing, and then I got into alto saxophone, because a lot of people I think get into clarinet first, and I was lucky. I just got into saxophone first, because for my money, the saxophone's an easier instrument than the clarinet, so I didn't have that opportunity to be kind of put off and think what's going on here. So yeah, it was alto sax, and then changed after a few years to tenor sax. And again, that was I got super lucky with my teacher at school. She's an alto saxophonist called Katie Brown, amazing alto player who put me through the paces, really, I guess, with lots of Charlie Parker transcriptions and Cannibal transcriptions and Phil Woods. And later when I was on the tenor, there was this particular Stan Getz transcription of a Con Alma that it doesn't sound like an improvised solo. You know, it sounds like one of those, it sounds like a study, you know, something that's been written out first. It's so paced and motivic and that kind of thing. That run really stuck in the mind. But yeah, so she put me through quite intensive, you know, bebop training, I guess, to start with, which I was really, really lucky to get. And yeah, I wouldn't play the sax, and I wouldn't play the sax in the way that I do if I hadn't had her as a teacher to start with. I lied. Yeah, you know, go on.
When did she start you on the bebop stuff? I mean, it couldn't have been right away.
No, it was. I mean, I kind of got the hang of I got the hang of the you know, physical, you know, 2-octave notes on the sax reasonably quickly, and I did the classical grades with her as well. I guess you have a similar system in the States, right? You kind of go through 1 to 8, playing classical repertoire. Do you have that?
Not really. You're talking about ABRSM, right?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, actually, a lot of people in the States do also do the ABRSMs, but each state has a school music association. They have their own solo competitions. And like, I'm from New York initially, so it was called NISMA, New York State School Music Association. We had levels 1 through 6, not
Gotcha.
through 8. But ABRSM is very, very, it's much more. Much more expansive. It's a lot more rigorous. That's a better word. It's a lot more rigorous than I think most of the other states. I know Texas has a really good system as well, but ABRSM I think is much more rigorous than what we have. So you got through the 2-octave range, you know, fairly well. She started you off with the, you know, the embouchure, no embouchure problems or anything like that, and then she started hipping you into like bebop. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was, and I don't even know, to be honest. I mean, I don't even know whether that was whether that came from me or from her. Whether I'd sort of given any sort of inclination that that was the thing that I was going to be into. But I'm really, really glad that she did, and that I got that kind of grounding in the language. And also, I couldn't. Obviously, I didn't know how to read chord symbols, but I kind of, as a horribly like arrogant little kid, I kind of said that I did, or kind of said that I knew how to do it before I properly knew how to do it. So I spent like quite a lot of time catching up, because she'd put some fairly, more advanced than the level I was at stuff in front of me, and a lot of it kind of went in by ear. So it was a good combination in that grounding in the language and the grounding in the theory, but also quite heavy on the ear training as well. Yeah, she was just a brilliant, inspiring teacher.
All right, I have a couple of questions here. What age did you start on the saxophone?
It would have been about 9 or something like that.
Okay, so that's like our fourth grade equivalent here. Okay,
Hmm.
and so she was your teacher. How long was she your teacher?
5 years.
Wow.
Oh no, 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 longer, longer. Maybe like 8 years or something like that. Because
That
I
is
kind of,
that
yeah,
is
in the
so
one
cool.
school, and then I went to the next school, and she taught me throughout both.
Oh my gosh. All right. Wow. Okay. Um, when you were first taught, okay, so violin, were you taught Suzuki by ear?
No, I wasn't, but I had friends that learned that way, and they always seemed to be incredibly well. I mean, incredibly advanced in certain respects, but it seemed to the Suzuki method seemed to bring quite a lot of kids on like early in their learning careers quite quickly. I don't really know enough about what happened then to know whether it reaches a point where everybody else catches up. But the Suzuki, certainly in the classical world, seemed to really bring people on leaps and bounds in the early stages, I thought.
Yeah, the thing with Suzuki is that it's all ear. The parents also are
Mm,
learning with the kids, their own children as
hmm.
well. And it's you really develop your ears. The hard thing, as a music educator, I know this too. People have had a hard time transitioning from all ear to reading, and
Mm,
so I'm music learning theory trained, Dr. Edwin Gordon. So like they address that with that particular approach. But the reason why I'm asking too, also when you were singing in operas and stuff, so were you reading that music or were you learning it by ear?
no, I was reading it. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That is so interesting. I always find that interesting because some guests, started off just learning everything by ear and didn't want to
Mm,
read. And then some were trained like the way I was, reading and playing at the same time. But you mentioned though that Katie, your teacher also did extensive ear training with you as well. So I guess she started you out, started you, reading and playing whatever, but she quickly brought in the ear
hmm.
aspect. What if I don't even know if you would remember, it's such a long time ago, but do you remember like some of the first things she had you, doing by ear or listening to, whatever?
That's such a good question. So I wasn't transcribing by ear until a lot later. I
Okay.
mean, like late teens, early 20s type of thing. I always used to transcribe, write it out by hand, and then learn the solo that way. And then it's only later that I've started transcribing by ear. So it wasn't that. It was more chord progressions, and then I'd have to find my way around those without necessarily knowing what they were. So she was really into, amongst lots of other people, she was really into Eric Alexander and David Hazeltine, and the whole scene around that. I think she knows some of those guys. Her husband Steve Brown is a fantastic, is an amazing drummer, and I think plays with them. So there's lots of crossover, and I think they've all kind of played together at some point. She studied in Texas as well, by the way. So yeah, she would give me chord progressions of theirs, and you know probably some of the easier ones, or less, less going to places ones, and I would kind of find my way around those. But then at the same time, she was incredibly fastidious about transcribing all these complicated arrangements of tunes, so we kind of had a balance.
That's so cool because I'm just thinking to myself, okay, you know, you said, "Oh, I know these chords, whatever." You really didn't. So you were sitting there,
Mm,
she was playing chords, you're finding the notes by ear
mm,
before the labels are sticking in your head, which is
mm-hmm.
actually in a way good because, you want that exploration and then you want to put a label on it. And I think that's what definitely helps. And you said something before. I was writing it down. Soaring over nice harmony, and that is a perfect explanation of what I'm hearing on your album, which I will get to in a minute. That's exactly what I was hearing. Then I'm thinking to myself, okay, he did start on a different instrument, violin, and you also sang. And I could kind of hear that kind of approach to your, even though I know you weren't into the violin, but I think the early exposure to violin and to singing and to soaring over the nice harmonies, I really think that affects the way you're approaching your playing for sure, because that's what I'm hearing. And it's really so cool.
Man, well, I'm really glad you hear that because I think it's how I think about it a lot of the time, even subconsciously. And it's also a nice thing that you've said because they sound like things that people would want to listen to. So yeah, thanks.
Oh no, please. It's oh my gosh. When people hear your new album, they're going to be like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." But so going on. So she was your main influence. Do you remember, aside from the studies of bebop and all that kind of thing, you took to the saxophone fairly quickly and stuff like that. What were some of the tone exercises that she had you do that you remember really had an impact on your tonal concept? Because really, you have an incredible sound, and I think this would be helpful to people.
That's such a good question, and I wish I had a useful answer to you. I don't remember doing that much of that kind of stuff. It was more to do with tone matching, and she would say, find a saxophone player that you like the sound of, and then when you transcribe them, you try and match your tone to theirs. And I suppose that's a way of developing your own tone, even if you don't exactly reach what you're going for. And I guess you never would reach what you're going for because my physiology is different to ex saxophone players' physiology, but I'm developing the tone on the way, I guess. It wasn't until a lot later that I started working on specific sort of exercises. A lot of that involves singing down the horn and producing the note at the same time. But that was a little later. That wasn't at the start.
Okay, I'm going to dive into that singing down the horn in a second. No, that's interesting. But okay, tone matching. So, do you remember like the first, few saxophonists that she had you thinking about to match tone?
Stan Getz was one.
Okay.
And I guess we talked about it with Cannonball as well. And I think, because I was kind of asking questions about articulation and stuff like that, and like why does it sound so good and why does it feel so good? So I think thinking about tone and sound was in a sort of holistic way that involved feel and articulation, like articulation with the mouth and articulation with the hands and that kind of thing. So I was never really ever thinking about tone in isolation. I tell you what, actually, there's the American tenor player Scott Hamilton.
Okay.
So those were some of the first gigs that I ever saw live, and that was at the jazz club underneath Pizza Express on Dean Street in Soho in London. And I was going there from quite a young age, and I remember thinking, and I mean I still do, that his sound is absolutely amazing. So that was always something in my mind on tenor I was trying to get close to.
Cool. All right. So now I'm going to get back to the singing down the horn in a minute. You mentioned articulation inside with your tongue, but articulation with your hands. Do you mean the coordination between air, tongue, and fingers? Is that what you mean? Or are you meaning something else?
Yeah, I guess, just the coordination between what's going on up here with the embouchure and what's going on, exactly the moment where you're changing the fingering to get the notes. And I think I've kind of noticed that a little bit more recently when I've been trying to become more comfortable playing in odd times. And part of that is obviously not all of that, but part of that is being able to articulate things in what I would think of as tight corners quite easily and quickly, and being able to turn around from the off side of the beat to the on side of the beat and that kind of thing. And then that just really exposed a weakness in my playing where either the articulation in the mouth would be ahead of the articulation in the fingers or vice versa. So I think being able to marry them up a little bit better has just improved my articulation and feel and able to deliver things in the way that I want to deliver them. So yeah, but it was only really playing in odd time that got me properly starting to think about that.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too because in listening to your album, I'm even though like, I could feel it's some of them were probably in like a 12/8 or a 6/8 time, but I
Hmm.
felt that odd meter groove to that. So I'm curious, it was when you realized that, oh, you know what, this may be a little bit of a weakness in my playing, what kinds
Hmm.
of exercises did you do to clear that up?
Mm. So yeah, great question. I mean, I think one of the pleasurable aspects of practicing in lockdown was that it enabled me to practice proactively rather than reactively. So I think before coronavirus, the majority of my practice would be centered around, what could I not do on the gig last night, or what could I not do on the gig 2 days ago? Either because I tried to do it and couldn't, or because I kind of at the back of my mind like was hearing this thing in a certain improvisation context and just wouldn't have been able to do the thing that I wanted to do. So a lot of my practice in that way before the pandemic was reactive, and it was kind of corrective as well. It was like, well, I can't do this, so I want to be able to do this, so I'm going to come up with something that enables me to practice. Whereas during lockdown, because I had so much more time on my hands and no gigs, that enabled me to really sit and think, well, I want to be able to get better at playing in odd times, and I want to be able to get better at knowing exactly where I am relative to the beat in the way I articulate things, and I want to be able to get better at playing genuinely fluidly through the altissimo rather than sort of having set ways of getting into it and getting out of it. So then I'd kind of try and develop exercises that combined those things actually. So I had this teacher when I was at Royal Academy in London called Barak Shmuel, incredible teacher he was teaching us mainly focusing on rhythmic skills, and he was telling us about the envelope or envelope theory, where if you practice three things, say at the same time, the one that you know best, and I'm paraphrasing here, and he would be able to explain it better, but the one you know best is the one that is being learned at the deepest level, and then the one that you know second best, slightly less deep, and the one that you know that is newest to you is kind of at the top of your consciousness, isn't getting so embedded in. So I thought, well, if I can practice a particular scale over the whole range of that alto, over the whole range of the tenor in a particular time signature, that's three things that I'm practicing there. Now, I probably know the scale best, and I probably know the time least, and then the range thing is in the middle. So it's kind of a way of what's the word?
I guess hitting three birds with one stone. I mean, it's
Yeah, and properly internalizing things while you're working on them. So yeah, that was a tangent, I guess. But yeah, so kind of trying to come up with exercises that would address multiple things at one time, because you're always internalizing one of them more than you are the other,
yeah,
if that
because
makes sense.
no, absolutely, because your brain can only handle so much at one time. So,
Hmm.
trying to address three different things, you're still making progress with all three. The one that you may make the most progress with will be the one that you're most. No, I can't say that. I can't. I was just about to say, the one that you know the most, you're going to make the most progress with. But no, that's not true because when you think about it,
Mm.
the one that you're making the most progress with is the one that you're least comfortable with because you're working on it in a different kind of way, different kind of
Mm.
approach. So
Mm.
you're going to see the most growth there. All right. I know I just went off on a tangent, but anyway, so yeah. So then you were creating your own exercises, let's say based off of a scale or something. And, let me try to, whether it's, I guess, going up and down the scale or maybe playing the scale in thirds or doing a cell, like a 1, 2, 3, 5 or something like
Hmm.
that, using that kind of idea and then going into the altissimo but also doing like odd meter types of timing and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And different rhythmic groupings over the odd meter thing. So, if you're practicing something in 11, you want to be able to play in groupings of 3, 4, 5, whatever, all the compounds and stuff like that. And then you would articulate those groupings in a different way, right? You could practice 3-note groupings, but if there was a note on each subdivision, that's easier than taking away the middle subdivision and practicing in 3 divisions because you're having to feel the space. Similarly, how are you going to split up 5? Is it going to be 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, nothing, and the 3? So trying to get comfortable with with those kinds of cells and how they fit. I'm very new to it though, and not very advanced rhythmically, I would say, compared to a lot of people. So it's just something that I knew I wanted to work on. I
That's
don't know.
hard for everybody. That's truly hard for everybody. And I'm just thinking, were you using something like, well, actually, I was going to grab my phone and show like tonal energy. Like, were you using like some kind of app, metronome app or something like that, or a backing track? What were you using?
Yes, I was making loops on Metronomics, although I'm sure other apps are available. But Metronomics is definitely one I would recommend. Really allows you to sort of customize the whole loop, and you can have it going multiple times and customize the sounds, and I think you can quantize it on there as well. And there's another good app called Drum Genius that has some good loops for practicing in a slightly more musical way, because they're recorded by actual humans rather than being a metronome.
Oh, that's really cool. And I'm going to assume that Drone Genius also, you use that for tuning as well, not just metronomes.
Drum Genius it was.
Oh,
As in,
drum. Okay,
yeah,
I thought it
yeah.
was drone. All right, cool. Drum Genius and Metronomics are apps. All right, cool. That's awesome. I'm not familiar with those. So we'll have to look those up for sure. I think that'll definitely help people. Now I'm going to dive back. You had mentioned, working with tone, and later on your approach, or later on, one of your approaches was, you mentioned singing through the horn. What do you mean by that? Do you mean being able to hear the pitch, being able to, and the only way you're hearing is by singing it, by the way, but hearing it, singing it, and then just like matching, your oral cavity, or is this something else?
So it kind of began. Well, first of all, I should say that people that know more about this will listen to this podcast. So I would be fascinated if after we've recorded it, someone can explain to me why I had success with this and why this works, because it's something that I don't think I fully understand. So I'll just say that as a disclaimer at the start. I'm super interested if someone can. I mean, you will probably be able to tell me, Donna, why this is working, because I don't know, and lots of other people probably do. So it kind of began. I had a fantastic teacher called Gareth Lecraine, who plays the flute. He's a brilliant musician. We were talking about getting language. He's got, I think, the most language out of anybody I know personally. It's amazing. And he had this exercise where you would play a phrase, for 4 bars, say continue singing it for 4 bars, and then you would play it, and then you would sing, and you would try and construct a solo in 4-bar chunks, playing the saxophone for 4 bars, singing 4 bars. Anyway, that was really useful, because as you say, you can't play something that you don't know something until you sing it. So that was a great ear training exercise, apart from anything else. But it kind of, the joins between where you would finish playing and start singing, and finish singing and start playing, they felt very different to me, I guess. They felt like it was using a different part of my anatomy, and I was thinking, well, really, they shouldn't be. Like, a lot of it's coming from support from the diaphragm. A lot of it, you're thinking about tone quality and delivery and articulation. So those things, it kind of weirded me out a little bit that the singing felt so alien to the sax playing, and vice versa. And that kind of got me down the road of trying to do both at the same time, and trying to investigate what was going on when you were singing versus what was going on when you were playing down the saxophone. And the way that I sort of conceptualized it in my head was that there was 2 sounds being produced. There's the saxophone sound, the vibration of the reed reverberating through the saxophone, and there's also the singing sound, which is your vocal cords. And I kind of found that you can, and again, this isn't going to be new to people, but that you can dial both up and down independently of the other. You can drone a low C on the saxophone and sing a G a fifth above that, and apart from anything else, it sounds really nice because it's producing all these nice overtones. But you can make the G louder or softer, and you can make the C louder or softer. And being able to have that kind of control over those 2 sounds, I think, improved my tone, and I don't know why. And it improved my control of the note, especially in the altissimo range and in the overtones. And I think I could hazard a guess as to why that is, which is because you're having to try and control 2 things, and you're trying to pay loads of attention to the way you're producing a sound. So I would do things like hold a drone at the bottom of the saxophone, playing a low C, and then sing a 2-octave scale up to the C above that, or maybe 2 octaves and a fifth above that. And then you can do that holding every note on the saxophone, every single semitone from low to very high. And then you can flip that round. So you can sing a low drone, and then you can practice a saxophone scale on the keys of the instrument all the way up. And just trying to make that sound nice, and trying to make those notes not split, and make it sound even. Yeah, I think that's probably all I have to say on that. And I don't really know why it works, but what I can say is it massively helped develop my tone in the direction that I wanted it to, and gave me more control and more support. And it must have been developing embouchure muscles that clearly I needed to work on.
Wow. No, I've never heard anybody do something like this before. And that's, again, maybe my, naivete or whatever. The one I'm guessing at, I never tried that either. What I'm guessing is that also it helped your breath support too, because I mean, and it's also tremendous concentration as well. It's very hard to, play one pitch and then sing something else without the tone splitting or it's not like a brass instrument. Like, I also play trumpet. So in college, one of my friends, great trombone player, Robert Casera, he's still in New York, and he would always be able to play chords on the trombone. He'd play a low note and he'd sing the third, or sing another note, and he would be playing chords, and it was so cool, and it sounded nice. It didn't have any kind of split tone or anything like that. It just was a really, he was able to make a chord. Very, very difficult to do on woodwind, or particularly a saxophone. Getting it to sound really, really nice, really pretty, really, really full. But I'm just thinking that, that the tremendous concentration that you need to have, but also, like you said, the control. I mean, the idea is that we want to control the reed. We don't want the reed to control us. That's the first thing. And unfortunately, sometimes that reed does control us. But I'm also thinking too, though, I was thinking that you were going to go with the approach when you were talking about how, I think it was Gareth, right?
Oh yeah, Gareth, yeah.
He would have you start playing a solo and then sing the next 4-bar chunk, and then play another 4-bar chunk and then sing the next 4-bar chunk. That's really cool. Because the thing is that everything comes from singing. If anybody that's listening, is classically trained, even if you're totally into jazz too. I mean, my trumpet teacher would make me sing everything before I played it. And he would say to me, don't listen to trumpet players, but listen to opera stars, or, from the past, like UC Björling, Caruso, Jesse Norman, listen to those people to get your tonal concept, and let that guide you. Always let let the music guide you, not how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I put my mouth? All that kind of stuff. Let the music guide you. So I think that may be a little part of it in terms of that particular exercise, because the biggest pain point is like, how do I play what I hear in my head? Well, you know what? And Jamie Aebersold said this all the time too. Anybody can improvise. But, if you start working out, play something and then, continue a solo, sing something else, I think in time that's a great exercise to start to do that, for sure. But that drone exercise is really interesting. And I'm curious, I'm just thinking breath support. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely embouchure. But also, in terms of how you shape your oral cavity too, that's interesting as well.
Yes, I mean I'm really glad that you have thoughts on it, and that you don't think I'm talking out of
No.
whatever orifice. I don't know if I can swear on your podcast, but I've said it to people before, and they've kind of looked at me like I'm trying to sell them snake oil type of thing, and it's something I don't talk about very much when I'm teaching, because it's something that's just only really worked for me. But I'm sure there's a reason behind it. To do with kind of sculpting the sound, it feels like, and knowing what it feels like to be in that sound for a long time. Similar to the way people do long tones, I suppose. I suppose it's really similar to that. But I would recommend it, and I would also be interested in anything that anyone has to say on it. And thank you for your perspective on it as well.
Oh, no, of course. And the interesting thing too, while, like you're at the stage, you've been playing it a while, what you're doing, the more you teach it and then you start to see what people are struggling with, and then you have to say, why are they struggling? What's going on? How can I help them? That's going to solidify why it works, and then you're gonna you know what I'm saying. So like that's going to definitely help you like solidify. Okay, why exactly is this working? And it's funny, as a teacher, also I learned so much from my students too. Like there's certain exercises that I have people do, and some students have found different ways to approach them. Like, oh, that's brilliant. It's awesome. Why didn't I think of that? But it's definitely helpful. And what's so interesting too is that, again, the soaring melodies, the soaring, higher melodies and stuff like that, over the harmonies. As soon as you mentioned, like, you explained your tone exercise again, I could see how everything's related. Everything. Yeah, I could definitely see how everything's related with that for sure. That's very interesting too. And what I'm finding also is that, yes, you're working on your embouchure, but you're not so stuck in how to. You know what I mean? Like you're letting the music guide you.
Yes, I think that's true. I think I sometimes have a tendency to practice in a less than fully musical way if I'm just trying to internalize some rhythmic thing or a scale or a bit of harmony or something. So it's a good corrective to that. It's a more musical way of practicing, I think.
For sure, for sure. So we talked about early influences and some later teachers. So you mentioned you went to the Royal Academy.
Yes, I did. I did a postgrad there, which was 2 years, split over 3 years. Actually, I had a year out in the middle where I lived at my mum's and practiced and looked after her new dog.
That's awesome. And then after college, after college, what did you do? You just started gigging, I'm assuming.
Yeah, because I suppose so. I'd done an undergrad, not a music undergrad, but for 3 years before that. So I'd been gigging a little bit through that around the town, and then I moved back to London, which is where I'm from, to do the postgrad. So I had a little bit of work already, and I was trying to pick up as much as I could throughout those 2 then 3 years of doing the masters. So I kind of came straight out into full time working, which was cool.
Cool. Before we get there, so what did you do your undergrad in, if it wasn't music?
Was English literature.
Oh, how cool.
It
Interesting.
was, it was, yeah. I really enjoyed it. I was really lucky to get the opportunity to be able to do that, and yeah, write essays for 3 years, and yeah, just read books and poetry and kind of stuff like that. But I mean, I wasn't doing a lot of saxophone practice at that time, so it's always a trade-off, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And what's interesting though, in my head, I'm just thinking about connections, and I'm just thinking how those studies help you to become a storyteller on your horn. I don't know if you thought about that.
Yes, I would hope so. It's funny. I've always kind of thought about improvising when I do it, as opposed to X amount of the masters and legends that have gone before and are still around and have their very developed story to tell and a reason why. I think when I do it at the moment, I'm thinking about it in a slightly more removed sense of just trying to find connections and moments and weird little oddities. You know, those moments where you sort of join with people and you both know what you're doing at the same time without having to talk about it beforehand. And I'm more looking for that. And then the whole practice of it becomes a meaningful thing to do in the presence of other human beings. In terms of actually telling a story, I don't know if I've got to that level yet, because I don't know if at 30 I've got a story to tell. As a privileged white guy living in London, but yeah, I'm sure. Interestingly, actually, I remember Ambrose Akinmusire came into Academy to do a masterclass, and he said that he often, as part of his compositional process, he'll write a short story, and then the composition will take two characters from that short story as as the inspiration for some of the musical motifs. And I was thinking that's so far away from my creative practice, and he's one of the musicians I admire the most. So I should take a leaf out of that book really at some point. Um,
That is
Yeah.
so cool. That is, no, that's awesome, and it's definitely, yeah, that's definitely another approach that people can absolutely take, and
Mm.
using different parts of the brain when you think about it, to
Yep.
bring to your practicing for sure. Or you know
Hmm.
what? Let's talk about how the thing with your latest album, Dream Band. I mean, you have all these incredible musicians. How did you meet a bunch of these musicians? And then we're going to get into like what happened during lockdown and what you all
Mm.
did.
Sure. Yeah. Well, all of these musicians, I think, no, the majority of these musicians I know from the London music scene. And it was part, I was thinking about a second album for Fresh Sound, and I was thinking about all the people that I know and I'm lucky to get to play with and that inspire me. And partly it was a selfish thing because writing for three different bands is very stretching and inspiring, so I picked people that I had got to know over the years from London, and then who else is on it? Chris Cheek, who I met when he came over and did a tour with a short tour with a bass player called Simon Wolf, and I got to play on some of those gigs, and it was actually him. It was amazing to get to play with him because he's one of my heroes, one of all saxophone players' heroes, I think, and it was him that put me in touch with Fresh Sound. So it was really cool that he recorded remotely. And then David Adewumi is a fantastic trumpet player based in New York currently, who I met, I think, in 2016 on a Dave Liebman organised International Schools of Jazz conference at Berkeley, which was really cool. Luisito Quintero, the percussionist, was a recommendation to me from my friend Ant Law, and he was, incredible musician, and amazing to work with. And those three recorded remotely, and everybody else, I think, I'm just making sure in my head that I'm not missing anybody out. Everybody else is from London or works in London.
Yeah, I gotta say, I was just thinking to myself too, listening to the album, the production, the engineering is really good.
Mm. Sonny Johns, yes, UK, based in Leeds in the UK. He worked on some Buena Vista Social Club albums. I think that's his background, and then he does a lot of recording of sort of contemporary jazz here in the UK. Yeah, brilliant, incredible presence in the studio as well. Understated, but always completely engaged. Incredibly warm, encouraging, but in very few words, which is just an amazing combination when you're recording music. When a lot of the time it can make people sort of retreat completely into themselves, or it can bring out a really extroverted side. He was just a very grounding presence.
That's cool. Grounding. Yeah, that's actually really good because I think that's what's needed, in the studio and stuff like that. So all right, so you have this pool of musicians, you're doing gigs, all of a sudden lockdown happens. Okay. And then you're thinking about, all right, I'm practicing proactively. I love that.
Hmm.
Practicing proactively. And then you probably have the thought of putting together an album. So talk about that process.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, some of the people I had worked with before, and some of the people were completely new to me. So it was, and this is the sort of dream aspect of it, I suppose, because I kind of wanted to undercut any sort of lurking sentimentality in the title Dream Band by having three dream bands, because there's more than one possible configuration of those musicians, and the first thing to do was to think who I really wanted to record with, and then the second thing to do was to think of combinations of those which I thought would sound really cool, and write from that. And I suppose, to be honest, a lot of lockdown one was spent in this slightly suspended state of not really knowing what was going on. It all felt very surreal and at times scary and at times euphoric. Speaking from a personal point of view, not to minimize all the incredible suffering that's been going on over the last 2 years, but just in my experience, it had highs as well as lows. So just kind of living in that haze is another aspect in which it's a dream band that's kind of come out of that period of unsettlement and uncertainty, if that first word is a word. So yeah, it was identifying, and then it was working out what combinations would sound cool and then writing for it. And then, people were more around than they normally are. So it meant that the concept of it was to just have 3 days in the studio with each different band and just to document that. And I don't think it would be possible at any other time, to be honest. I mean, would it? It's so hard to organize. People are so busy because they're great. I can't imagine it happening at any other time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm just thinking too with the people that you called up. You know what really knocked me out? And I normally don't focus on singers, but the singers. Oh my God. I was just like, holy cow, I'm just looking Midori and Charisse. Wow. And they're totally different. They're totally different styles, you know?
Yes.
So, that obviously informs your writing style as well. You knew them. I'm assuming that you knew them because in order to write for them, you had to write for their style.
I didn't actually know Midori. I'd worked with Charisse for a couple of years beforehand, but I didn't know Midori until I got to writing for this project, and just saw a cover of a song that she had done on her Instagram, pizzicato, cello and voice, and thought that was amazing and thought that would work really well with the tenor, the sort of sonority of that. So I asked her to be involved, and she was.
Yeah, and I think Wolf and Nina, that was the first track that I heard, and it was like she had this kind of like I'm gonna I'm gonna use the word haunting. I don't really necessarily mean that, but it was like this quality that was like, wow, this is really cool. It just like really caught my attention, and just the fact, how often are you hearing a cellist, singing also, I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, with her own band as well, she often plays in sort of long form odd time signatures, and she's holding down a riff on the cello and singing over the top of that, which is a musical aesthetic that really appeals to me. And she's got a really quite a unique combination of intensity, I think, and also being quite laid back and ready for things to come to her and not judging those things, and I think you can kind of hear that in the delivery as well, and in the lyrics she wrote. There's intensity there, but it's sort of, it's not detached, but again it's this idea of floating over the top and in between and in the cracks, and yeah, that really appealed.
That's interesting. Intensity. Yes, I definitely felt that. And again, it's that floating over the top. And that's why it resonates, I think, with you.
Perhaps. And then, as you said, Charisse is a completely different singer and also has that intensity at the end of, there's a tune called To Love Itself. And, there's incredible intensity in her performance, I think, at the end there, and the way that she contributes and kind of leads the band build. But it's a different type of intensity, and just the pure quality of her voice, the specific nature of her tone, again, I think lends itself really well to being treated compositionally as another horn rather than a vocalist per se. Although I have to say, I've on more occasions than I care to mention, I've been in situations where Charisse has been singing jazz standards and has had audiences eating out of the palm of her hand. So she's very capable of doing both.
Wow. Yeah. It's so interesting because that's the immediate thought I had in my head. The differences between the two singers, like I said, they totally knocked me out, both of them. But Charisse was like another horn player. Like, so those compositions, or well, let me backtrack. So Midori wrote the lyrics for the songs that she appeared on.
Yes, she wrote the lyrics for Wolf and Nina, which I wrote, and then she didn't write the lyrics for Azalea because
Oh, right, of course, yeah.
yeah, but yeah, she wrote them for Wolf and Nina.
Okay, yeah. So then, but for Charisse, this was the interesting thing. So, I had said to you before we started recording, a lot of people mentioned, like some influences, like the press, mentions influences like Joe Lovano, Mark Turner, Branford Marsalis, that they're saying that, have influenced you. I'm wondering if Pat Metheny has influenced you. And the reason why I'm saying that is because he sings his solos as he's playing. And I'm thinking you and the singer, she's not singing like, words or lyrics per se, but she's singing horn lines, that you're playing, with her. And I'm thinking Pat Metheny.
Yes, that's a really interesting one. I mean, ignorantly, I haven't checked as much Pat Metheny music out as I should have done, but I've obviously heard quite a lot. We used to play quite a lot of Pat Metheny in the big band that I was in at university. Some of his writing with Lyle Mays, and yeah, maybe some of that has filtered in somewhere. It's interesting that you mentioned that about the press thing and where that comes from, whether people would have said names like Joe Lovano or Branford Marsalis, because obviously they are several dozens of cuts above, and I also, just from a objective point of view, I don't hear that in my playing at all. I love their playing, but it's just not the thing that I would think of. So I'm always amazed by the different points of reference that people have, because I love Branford Marsalis's playing, and I would love to think that I have internalized something of his playing, but I can't hear that personally.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how people perceive our playing, and their perception, obviously their perception of that as well. But everybody's going to have their own opinion when it comes to that. And I obviously am really impressed with, your playing and your writing and everything. I think it's just really so amazing. I do. And I could maybe hear a little Mark Turner, in your playing. That was one of the references as well. But I just keep going back to, like listening to the tracks and I'm hearing the influence of a singer. I'm hearing the influence of a singer when it comes to your playing. It's very melodic. And what's interesting too, like your phrasing, you have such a control of your phrasing. Sometimes it could be jagged, sometimes it could be very lyrical. Sometimes it could be, definitely 2-bar phrases or 4-bar, whatever. But, definitely that your phrasing is just really, really interesting, and that's what really struck me.
You're really kind. I really appreciate it, Donna. That means a lot. And you should also write my next press release.
Awesome. Cool. Well, now let me ask you though, you wrote the songs for the album. What is your writing process like? I kind of have a little bit of an idea, but, I'd love for everybody to know.
Yes, I would love to know myself what my writing process is like. To be to be honest with you, I think sometimes it's a little composite. So I will have various different ideas, and then it'll be a sort of process of which ones go with which, and how can you shape idea B to, not to retrofit idea A, but to kind of make them of a piece. Or often it's idea A and idea X or whatever, because there can be a lot. And yeah, I think it really starts from writing for the people that I want to play it, and also I think the context really dictates it. For me, at least, sometimes I want to write music that just comes off the page after 30 minutes of rehearsal, and then it can kind of breathe on the gig, and musicians can settle into it because they're super comfortable with it. And sometimes I want to write music that's 6 pages long and is really studied, and if you played it on a gig, people would be, it would kind of be, you'd have your glasses on and you'd have the stand quite high, and it would be a concentrating gig, which I get as much out of as an audience member as a gig where everyone knows the tunes really well, or a free gig where there isn't necessarily written music. So I think it depends on the context. And the context this time, as I say, was the musicians that were on the album and dictating it, and things that I thought would suit them and be interesting in combination. I was a little bit conscious that I didn't want it to have a slightly corny compare and contrast element throughout the album, where it's like, look how different this band is to this band. I wanted them more to be of a piece and sort of have a consistent sound world, even though obviously the performances are different and the delivery is different.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely felt that, and so it was interesting with some of Sharice's songs. Like those were composed; those had to be because you guys were playing the same lines and stuff like that. And they were intricate, and they were just I just thought it was so interesting. And no, I definitely felt, I felt the connection between all the pieces. I personally did. I thought it was really good. Now you're talking about, and when you said, you write for the people, as soon as you said that, I'm like, yep, that's exactly what I was going to say,
Mm,
because, you had even mentioned it before too. You were thinking about sonority, right? You were thinking
mm,
about, okay, what could I do with Midori's voice and her cello playing? And what would sound better, tenor or alto? Tenor. Okay, so you know what I'm saying? So you're also thinking in terms of timbre as well.
hmm. Yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then the combinations of rhythm section players as well was really important. And some of it was people that had played together quite a lot before, and I wanted to sort of have some of that kind of closeness, um, that feeling on the record as well. So it was pragmatic things as well as timbre and aesthetic consideration.
Yeah, that's actually a great point too. For a lot of the people that listen, but also for the musicians that I do interview,
Mm,
the rhythm section has to be tight. They have to be locked in, and that has to be a huge consideration. When you're wanting to create an album and stuff like that, and thinking about the people that you want on that album. And I would think that, yeah, you would want people that have performed together because that tightness takes time to develop.
yes, it does. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes that tightness is kind of there from the first time people play together. I've kind of seen that happen before. A little bit of people just come into a room and they make it happen there and then some people have a really distinct style that's almost developed as a pair, and there's a specific hookup between them that like no one else really has that hookup. So I think you can have both. The next project that I kind of want to do with the dream band thing is to do it live and do it with three new bands of people, and I think there's a lot of combinations within those bands where people haven't played together before. So that's kind of part of it as well, and seeing what happens and documenting what should be a reasonably spontaneous series of gigs.
Wow. Okay. So this is interesting. So your next project that you're thinking about, Dream Band, like part two, but it's not exactly the same musicians that you're using. It's going to be different musicians and different configurations.
Yeah, I think for this specific project, I'm quite committed to the idea that there's just X number of bands, aren't there? Really, there's so many. Just speaking in the UK, and I think the next one will just be musicians that are based in the UK, because who knows what's going to happen with Corona and travel restrictions and everything else. But it's such a joy to be able to bring those people together. They don't need me to give them a platform, because they're all successful and brilliant in their own rights. But to be able to kind of have that element of curation and see different combinations come together is really exciting. So I kind of it's almost a point of principle that I want all the musicians to be different just within this project. I obviously see the value in having a quartet that plays together for years and years, and I want to do that as well. But just to see how far I can push it with this one.
Now, with this project, will you be, let's see, the conversation about will the music be more free or will
Mm.
it be also composed? I guess I don't know if you've thought about that or.
No, no, it's a really good question. I mean, I've been thinking about it over this past week, so it's not very developed. It's not very developed thinking, to be honest, Donna. Um, but yeah, I think the idea would be to have all the music written, and then you maybe have three gigs on consecutive nights at the same venue, if that's doable, and then you work on the music during the day, and you do the gig in the evening, and everything is like quite fresh and new, but the music wouldn't be, yeah, just that we wouldn't have played the music before. We might never play the music again. It's just written for that specific, encounter.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That is really interesting. And because, we're recording this, you're going to be out to this.
Yeah, I know. I'm just thinking that as I'm saying it now.
Yay. Awesome. No, this sounds really cool. For sure. And, I'm just thinking, like how you're going to be able to do this. Well, especially with COVID too, but, hopefully by the time, you're able to start this project or whatever, a lot of restrictions will be lifted,
Hmm.
and you'll be able to do it, which will be great. But there is one question I do have with regard to the writing process, though that
Mm.
I usually ask a lot of guests on the show. In terms of your writing process, what do you think of first? Do you think of rhythms? Do you think of melody? Is it something else? Like, what do you think of?
I think That's such a good question. I've been going through a phase for the last few years where my favorite thing to hear is one diatonic scale with shifting harmony underneath. And it might be a sort of pedal point in the melody and then shifting harmony underneath, and how many different places you can go while keeping that one restriction. So I would say that means for the past few years, it's kind of been a harmony thing, and maybe melody led. More recently, I'm going to get to record next month with the brilliant bassist Jasper Hoyby, as part of a project that I've got with an amazing sax player called Tom Barford in this country. We released an album in 2020, and he's the bassist in the trio Phronesis, and they play a lot of odd time music, and that's by no means the only thing Jasper does, but I do know that it's something that I will learn a lot from him if I'm able to do that with him. So my more recent compositional process has been focused quite heavily on what rhythmically I can find and I could learn to play on, and would sound good. And yeah, so I think it varies. Again, it's a cop-out answer, but it varies depending on the context that I'm writing for.
No, not at all. And I'm curious. So, when you're improvising, right, and you're improvising over your own music, let's say, what is your approach to improvisation? I know this is a really loaded question. It's a heavy question, but I think what I'm trying to get at is a lot of people, I mean, we're always curious how people approach improvisation, right? But, you're writing your own music, and, you were talking about how, one idea may be like a diatonic scale with shifting harmony underneath, so how do you approach practicing something like that? And what, when you're performing it, like, what are you thinking about when you improvise? That's a really, really, really loaded question. I get it.
No, it's a good question, and I suppose one that I'm thinking about all the time. But I think you're looking for reactions and connections with other people in the band. If you're not playing on your own, if you're playing with other people, how far can you take a certain thing, or how much intensity can you build up, or how much lack of intensity can you build up, or volume or lack of volume, or speed or activity, or how far can you get someone to react to what you're playing and either support you or go against you, and to bring that out of other people and properly be communicating with people, rather than just like I play a phrase and they play an answering phrase. Like, try and lock in with other people as you would in a conversation and reach some sort of level of intensity, I think. And sometimes you're doing that rhythmically, and sometimes you're doing that harmonically. I like people that play out of key as a way of producing a certain result. So I'm often quite led by that, and led by the comping instrument. And I also like people that play incredibly intricate rhythmic stuff. So can I fit in with that? Can I fit in with what they're doing? So it's a reactive way to play, I suppose. But I'm just trying to find connections with other people in the band, I suppose, first and foremost.
What's interesting, like, I'm going to compare this back to, your English lit degree, but I'm also thinking about the word debate. It's almost like you're having a debate with people, where you have, this is what I'm saying. Oh, you're saying that, but it's not a debate in the times that we live in now. I'm going to say this because people are just, it's either my way or the highway or whatever, as opposed to, a real debate, like, this is my opinion, this is your opinion. And, oh, okay, well, we may not agree, but where can that lead us? Will that change my mind about something? I don't know. That's just the thought I have in my head right now.
No, you're absolutely right. And it would be how I think about it, because you have to be open-minded to what's going to happen next, right? If you go into a gig, or if you even go into a tune, and even if it's your own band, I would say, especially if it's your own band, actually, like, if you go into that environment thinking, I want it to go in this direction, I want this thing to happen, that's not going to result in the most honest possible music interaction, I don't think, and the most honest performance of that. piece and the most honest reflection of where you all are as a band at a moment in time. And just thinking about it, I've had experiences where I've played in bands with people that I really don't get on with, but had a really interesting musical experience. Or I've played in a situation where two other people have fallen out just before the gig, and it makes the gig really charged and interesting in it. And that doesn't have to be in a bad way. And I like it when you play with people that you know well enough to be like, well, yeah, this gig's going to have energy and we're feeling good, or we can lean into we're all feeling sad and we're going to embrace that. Not trying to predetermine where the music's going to get to, I suppose, and just being open to where other people see the music going as well, as you would in a conversation, I think.
Yeah, but now I'm curious though, when you say that, that's really insightful. I'm just curious though, like with some of the pieces that you wrote where they are more composed, right? You know what I'm saying? So then how, it's a little bit more difficult to be open-minded when it comes to that because you have everything set, so to speak.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of coming back to wanting to be able to write things that come off the page immediately. One page is things where musicians kind of really relax into them. I do quite enjoy writing through composed things, but it's not, it's possibly not the most satisfying way of playing music, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have both, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there's always, value in contrast.
Yes, and I suppose even within through composed pieces, someone might take one of the improvisation sections, and then that would completely shape what's going to come afterwards, right? You're not necessarily going to play the outro in the same way if the solo's been really frenetic and intense and energetic as you are if someone's kind of, depending on how they've contoured their solo. So I think there still is an element of reactivity in through composed music. I think part of it as well is my favorite music to play is not my own. Like, I really enjoy band leading, and I enjoy writing music, but I feel more free perhaps in playing other people's music because I feel like I have a responsibility to contribute to that music and realize their vision.
Wow.
Whereas setting the direction myself isn't something that comes naturally to me, even though I recognize that it's valuable
I'm
artistically to do
wondering
it.
I'm wondering if it could be, I'm just guessing, but when you're playing your own music, you're also the band leader, you've got a lot more things to think about as compared to I'm playing someone else's piece and this is what I'm focused on. I don't have to worry about band leading. I don't have to worry about, what, the direction of the music is going except for, my part or how I contribute.
I totally agree. I feel like you're saying that from personal experience, maybe. That feels very well observed.
It's my social work background, actually.
Right.
No, but it's music too, for sure. Now, I had asked you in terms of what are you thinking about when improvising, and you were mentioning, it's kind of reactive when you're with the band, but during lockdown, didn't have that opportunity. So when you were improvising, what's your thought process when you're working on improvisation, when you're working on improvisation, and then also just improvising?
When I'm doing it on my own.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I suppose I haven't played on my own for quite a while, I guess.
I
I
guess what I
guess
mean when you're in the
yeah.
practice room, like you're working out things, and then like my teacher used to say, you have your dinner, you work on your stuff, and then dessert is performing, playing stuff. So I'm like trying to compare like the two, like when you're working on dinner, and it may be broccoli, and you may not like the broccoli, but how you're working on the broccoli compared to when you're having the dessert, like that awesome apple pie, and you're performing, like thought process for each part of that.
I don't tend to do that a lot at the end of practice sessions, to be honest. I know that people say you should, and I think it is a valuable thing to do, and I know lots of people do it. I just don't tend to, I don't tend to play solo that much at the end of my practice sessions. Just never happens really.
That's perfectly fine. No, that's perfectly fine. So then my question is, what does a typical practice session for you look like?
Again, I'm not sure there is a typical one, but I guess starting off, I suppose, yeah, that's, it really varies. It really does vary, depending on what I want to be practicing, how much time I've got to, how much time I have. I don't think I practice in a particularly structured way necessarily. I quite like ending up feeling different ways at the end of practice sessions. Like sometimes I've worked really hard and I've been concentrating on this really hard thing to do, and then sometimes I feel like I will have just relaxed into one thing that I find easier and is kind of meditative, and I'm maybe thinking about sound and tone more than I'm thinking about specific technical things and articulation or scales or whatever. So I suppose I like a nice contrast in how practicing makes me feel. Sometimes it makes me feel worked up and ready to hit the bandstand. Sometimes it's kind of an end in itself, I suppose.
Wow, that's so interesting. And you know what? That absolutely relates to when you're improvising with others. It's almost reactive when you think about it.
Yeah, I guess so. I just don't want to have the same thoughts and feelings when I'm playing music all the time, because the context is never the same. The news is never the same. The day you've had is never the same. The way you wake up feeling, or what you've just had to eat, or what you have to do tomorrow is never the same. So, yeah, I think uniformity is not necessarily desirable. So, yeah, just trying to be productive, trying to get things done, trying to address weaknesses. But I suppose conceptually, I want to feel different things when I'm practicing.
Did that during lockdown, with all the emotions going on? I know we spoke about this before, but did that, and maybe you did kind of address this, but did you feel like your practicing changed? I know you had more time to practice, I get that, but did you feel like your approach to practicing changed during lockdown compared to when you had like no time?
Yeah, perhaps because when I had no time, I was just practicing the things I had to practice. Whereas in lockdown, I was more practicing the things that I really wanted to be doing and got something out of. So yeah, I think time is such how deep do you go into? I transcribed quite a lot of Shy Maestro at the beginning of lockdown, and around then, you could take one solo that you could really, it could last you a year. If you took it motif by motif, or bar by bar, or color by color, and harmony by harmony, that kind of thing, you could mine that solo for a completely unlimited amount of time. So how much detail do you go into? He's played a tiny little turn in 5/8 that lands him on beat 2. You could change any aspect of that. You could change the rhythm of it, you could change the articulation, you could change the mode it's in, and that would be like, what, if you were listening to it on a record, it would probably be half a second, and you're talking about a 3-minute solo. So I guess just the opportunity to go really in detail with things and work out permutations and stuff like that was a way it was a lot different.
And it's interesting. You actually just answered my next question, which is, when you're transcribing, what are you doing with that? And essentially, what you're doing is you're listening, you're grabbing something, you're figuring it out. But then also, you don't own something until you can vary it, and so you're looking at ways of varying it.
Right. Yeah. And exactly. I think just with transcribing, trying not to just steal and try, I don't want to take the line and then go and play it in my gig, and then, some people in the audience like it, because that's not a, that's not, that's not an artistic thing to do, I guess. I think you want to let transcribing inform your own playing and inform what you can do, and suggest possibilities for where you might go. But you're trying not to lift, you're trying to adapt and develop, I think.
Wow, that's a tweetable, actually, for sure. Yeah, because the thing is too. I mean, for a lot of people, it is hard enough to transcribe. It's hard to find the time, but it's hard enough to transcribe. But a lot of people think, okay, I'm just going to transcribe that piece of vocabulary, that lick, and I'll just throw it into my solo and I'm good to go. And that's how we make a solo. But that's not it. It's you think about how you're taught your own language, and you're the teachers in classroom like, okay, here's our 10 vocabulary words. I want you to first spell them properly, look up the definition, and then write 3 sentences for each one.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that.
Yeah, far be it from me to criticize anyone, and also far be it from me to say I haven't taken a Cannonball Adderley lick over a 2-5-1 and played it because I like the sound of it, in a solo. I'm not, as I say, far be it from me to condemn anyone doing that because I've done it myself many times. But I suppose just the next level of question when transcribing, I think, is why do I like this? Why have I alighted on this particular bit of solo? I'm transcribing Tigran Hamasyan playing over a repeated groove in 11. Why have I chosen this bit of the solo and not the other bit? And that's not specific to those notes exactly. It's the thing that they're doing, right? It's the effect that they're producing by maybe playing a meter over another meter, or kind of producing a new color by going out of the harmony and then coming back in. It's almost the gesture that you're attracted to, I think, as a listener and a musician, rather than the specific thing they're doing. So I think it's good to work out why you like that specific thing and then use that as a starting point, rather than it kind of closes it down if you're like, yep, I'm going to take that thing and I'm going to take that thing and I'm just going to play them. Whereas I think there's a lot of interrogation to be had about why you as a musician find certain things appealing.
Absolutely. And it's also the context of it. You're kind of, that's what you're saying, really. It's the context of it. Why does that particular series of notes sound that good? It has to deal with, like the chords it's over, the rhythms that are played, the color that's coming out. I think that's awesome. I think that's really, really helpful for people. Now, before we go, I have to ask, because like I said, your sound is really, really good. People are going to be very curious about equipment. What do you use?
Yes, I can talk. I'm very not knowledgeable about equipment, but at a very least, I know what I'm using. I guess just going back one last time, just to that last transcribing point, I guess I would also say, and just to completely undercut what I said, it depends on context, doesn't it? Because sometimes you'll hear a Lester Young solo, and that solo is perfect in the way it exists in itself. And if you took any one phrase and changed it, it wouldn't have that same magic. So I think you can obviously learn something from the phrases themselves and the way people phrase things. I just would want to make the point that like just taking the phrase is not enough. But obviously sometimes things do stand on their own and you can't really unpack them and you can't intellectualize them and that they don't call for it. Anyway, to answer the question that you actually asked.
No, that's actually great. That's a great point, because you're right. There's sometimes where, you want to quote, a lot of people do quote certain lines from people when they're performing. That's awesome. That's cool. I think the thing that we're both kind of saying is that, solos are artistic, they're creative. It's not necessarily stringing together a bunch of licks, because there's more to it than the notes and the rhythms. There is the context. There is also the time period. Some things were popular in certain decades than they are now, whatever, and that has to be taken into account. So no, I think that's an awesome point to bring about for sure.
I feel like my this conversation has been dotted with me making disclaimers, but that's the last one I'm going to make, I'm sure.
Oh, no, it's all good. It's all good. It's all good. So let's talk about your equipment.
Yeah. So I'm on a Selmer Super Balanced Action. I don't know the serial number. And I'm on a Ishimori Woodstone mouthpiece 8-star, and I use D'Addario Jazz Select reeds. And I'm pretty happy with all of them. And I've never been much inclined to experiment with loads of different gear. So now I've got a setup that I like. I'm not going to change it, I don't think. I had a really good experience with Shape Your Own Sound. I don't know whether you've talked to people about that before. The French company that 3D prints mouthpieces. I think they're brilliant. So yeah, I was playing on one of them. I think it was a 9 for quite a while. And instead of instead of sending them my specification and then they print it, I just went to the factory and tried a load that they already had pre-made, which was actually really cool, because often if you try a load of old Otto links and on paper they should be the same, a load of like 8 or 9 Otto links, and then the fun is finding the nuance and the colors in each one. With the Shape Your Own Sound ones, because they're 3D printed, if 2 mouthpieces are the same, they're exactly the same, which means the fine tuning is incredibly good. Because if you're, if you try a mouthpiece and you like the amount of control or the amount of edge it gives you, but you want a little bit more flexibility or something like that, they can be like, oh yeah, that's this one. So that sort of scientific approach to it quite appealed to me. As I say, I'm back on Ebonite at the moment, but I might swap back.
And on the Ishimori mouthpiece, are you using their ligature or are you using something different?
No, what's the ligature I'm using? It's one of those. I've seen Walter Smith use it. It's one of those ones where it's just a ring and it goes on. I think it's a Jody Jazz one, maybe.
Jody Jazz Power Ring?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, so easy. Just doesn't get in the way. It's like I want the ligature to not be there because it's a really irritating bit of equipment. So it just goes on. Don't think about it.
Yeah, and it's funny too. With the equipment, I forget. A bunch of people have said this, not just one particular person, but they've said you just want the equipment to get out of the way. You just want the equipment to allow you to be able to be artistic, be creative, and stuff like that. But I do want to ask though the strength of your reeds.
Yeah, 3 soft, I think.
Got it.
3 soft
Okay.
and 3 medium sometimes.
Cool, because people are going to ask, they're going to want to know.
That's great, man. I don't know why. I've just never had the curiosity to really get into the weeds on sax equipment. Maybe it's just because I don't know. Maybe that'll come further down the line, because it is important, obviously, and it deserves. It's not that I don't take it seriously. It's just that I'm not knowledgeable enough about it to have an opinion. So now I've found a setup that I like. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna ask questions of it too much.
Yeah, I think really what it is that you found a setup that you liked, and this is you're comfortable with this, and why change it? There's so many varying opinions about this. I know I've interviewed a lot of people who are very incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to equipment, when it comes to all the different brands of saxophones and the vintage saxophones. And all the different mouthpieces and that kind of thing. They've tried them all. And then I've had so many other people, like Bob Reynolds plays the same equipment that he's played for years and, decades at this point,
Yep.
so many other people as well. So there's no right or wrong. Everybody has their own, approach to that, and I just know for myself, when I found that the equipment was getting in the way and I've had to like go down the rabbit hole of trying out different things. It's not fun. It's not, for me, it's not fun. I know a lot of people are like, oh, you're crazy. I love trying out new stuff. I don't. It's just so many possibilities and stuff like that. It could be overwhelming for me. So, I love to try to just stick with one thing, for as long as I possibly can.
I'm interested in your perspective on that as a saxophone and trumpet player, because one thing that I'm often jealous about people that play the trumpet is that like they get it out the case, it's the exact same thing and it doesn't change. Whereas with the sax, you get it out the case, the reed's got X amount of moisture in it and you've got a new one or whatever. Like how do you find? Have you got a preference between the two?
Yeah, so with now this is interesting. I'm also, when it comes to trumpet, I've had the same setup for decades. So I'll use a Bach Strad 37, and then I have the GR. This is the Chase Sanborn mouthpiece. Is a GR Technology 65.6 MS mouthpiece. I haven't changed. I know a lot of guys that will have, like a lot of saxophone players, a lot of different mouthpieces, and I've had guys that have had like mouthpiece cases, 5 mouthpieces, and they will change mouthpieces during a gig, especially if they're doing lead trumpet work, which is incredibly taxing. And then, then maybe a few songs, they're not doing lead work, they're doing more solos. So they'll switch mouthpieces out. So there are some similarities when it comes to that. Yes, you do have, you could just pull out the horn, you can just play it. But I will say this too. I've interviewed people for this podcast, Lafrique, who's European based as well. They have what do you call it? Device. I can't think of the word right now, but it's basically like a sound type of bar, so to speak, that you could attach to not just your saxophone, but they have them for trumpet. They have them for all wind instruments. And they were at NAMM. They won. They won an award at NAMM the last time that we actually had NAMM in Anaheim. And I definitely noticed a difference when I put one on my saxophone. I didn't try it on my trumpet, but I definitely noticed a difference. I felt it. I heard it and I felt it. And that's the thing when you're dealing with, the extra accessories and stuff like that. And some of the guys that walked down with me to their booth were trying them out. And I heard a difference when they used this particular type of accessory.
Wow.
Sound bridge. That's it. It was like a sound bridge that, like on a trumpet, or even a saxophone, it could be placed between the mouthpiece and the receiver. So in other words, the mouthpiece in the neck, for a saxophone. And on the trumpet, it's in other spots as well, too. And it really makes the playing, it feels different. It feels more efficient. And, for some people, they may not feel that. That's cool. That's fine. But in terms of, like equipment, I try to have the mentality of, I just want to stick with one thing and I want to make it work. But if I'm finding that, like living out in California, I recently, unfortunately, started to develop asthma. And because we were close to one of the wildfires, and I think that garbage was in the air for quite a while. And so I had to rethink my equipment a little bit, because it not that the equipment was getting in the way, it's just that now life throws a curveball and you gotta prepare for it, So that's the way I like to think in terms of this stuff. But like I mentioned, I had a lot of trumpet friends who would have, and even teachers actually that I remember would have a garbage pail full of mouthpieces. I mean, I'm not kidding. I'm just like, oh my God. That's like, I'm like overwhelmed even thinking about that.
It sounds like an anxiety dream to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I practice later, I may be in a state of anxiety because of that.
Well, thank you for the Soundbridge recommendation. I've never heard of it, and I'm going to Google it.
Yeah, and you know what? Like I mentioned, I interviewed them at NAMM. So it's on the Everything Saxophone podcast, one of the earlier episodes. I'm going to actually write myself a note to make a link to that episode for sure. But what was interesting, so I was at working with the Key Leaves booth with Rulon Brown, who's an awesome guy, and Key Leaves are amazing, great accessories. And so I was doing the podcast interviews from there as well, but everybody that walked over to me, whether, it was a classical performer, a jazz performer, pop performer, and then they would be saying, you got to check out the Freaks. You got to go there. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. When a well-known repairman from Orange County, California, came up to me and said, oh yeah, I work on the horns of many people out here, many well-known people. I absolutely recommend those Freaks. I use them myself, and I recommend them for the people that I do repairs for. I totally understand what they're doing. I support it, and it makes a difference. When that person said that, I ran over there.
Yeah.
Because repairmen, I mean, to me, a lot of times we go off of other people's, recommendations and stuff, and so many people, then a repairman, I'm running over there.
Interesting. Yes, I agree. Very knowledgeable people, and subtle as well, like in the way that they understand the instrument as well.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. Well, listen, Alex, before we go, we've got to know where to find you on social media. So how can people find you?
I think my Instagram is probably the best. Is the best one? Is Instagram? My username is AB Hitchcock. That'd be the best.
Cool, awesome. And I will put links in the show notes. I'll also put that link to the Le Freak, and I'll also send that to you as well, too.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Donna. It's a total pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's really nice to chat.